A Howling film down under? Oh, you little ripper. Hi guys, so before we get into it, a quick disclaimer that I will be desperately trying to spoil this movie for you so you don't watch it. And second disclaimer is that you will find all my reviews for all the better Howling movies in my Howling playlist. So last night I watched Howling 3, or at least most of it. It got to like 19 minutes from the end and I couldn't take any more. I had to turn it off. And it was only this morning that I decided to be brave and watch the final 19 minutes on a break from work. So now I've watched the whole thing and I never have to do it again. This film takes place in Australia. It has nothing to do with the first two movies. So we've got a werewolf pack in the middle of the outback. They are the most terribly dressed pack of werewolves / humans I've ever seen. It looks like they got their costumes from a lost property box at the back of whatever studio made this film. It doesn't look like they were outfitted in a proper costume department, put it that way. One woman has had enough, don't blame her. She decides to leave for the big city. Her name is Jerboa, which is just a terrible name for a woman. It sounds like an African country or a snake. But she goes to Sydney. She doesn't know what to do. She's got no plan. She sits on a park bench in the middle of the city. And guess what happens next? A guy drives past and looks at her and thinks she'd be perfect for the movies, because that happens every day to people on park benches, doesn't it? So this guy gets her into this movie called Shapeshifters. Oh, the irony. And they end up falling in love, actually, Donnie, this guy, and Jerboa. But the fact that Jerboa is in Sydney in the first place draws unwanted attention from certain parties. Some scientists come from abroad to try and track down werewolves, and Jerboa's pack, they come to Sydney as well, and it all gets a little bit chaotic. To cut a long story short, later in the film, we end up back in the outback with a motley group of protagonists, including werewolves, scientists, actors kind of banding together, and men with guns are going after them. So it ends up a little bit like Crocodile Dundee 2, I suppose, except the fish out of water in this case is a werewolf and not an uneducated Australian man. So this film could have been called Werewolf Dundee or Crocodile Werewolf. That makes no sense, but it's a bad film. It's really bad. It was directed again by Phillipe Mora, who did the second one. The second one was average, but this one's literally terrible. Apparently, Phillipe Mora came back to do a third one because he wanted to make it as a kind of apology for the second one. Well, now he owes us 2 apologies, honestly. There's no recognisable actors in this. Christopher Lee does not come back. Thankfully, Lee did not sign a multi-picture contract when he got involved with the Howling 2. Honestly, I bet he shudders to think that he could have ended up in Howling 2, 3, 4 and so on. But no, he's not in this. And I doubt you will recognise anybody else in this either. There are some Australian actors you might recognise by face. I recognised a couple of people from Crocodile Dundee, funnily enough. Somebody from Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. But by and large, this film is just populated by really bad Australian amateur actors who I probably wouldn't hire for Home and Away. They're just not very good. I do have some positives for the movie. There were 2 funny scenes. This is officially a horror comedy. I mean, it doesn't have anything really in the way of horror, but in terms of comedy, there were 2 scenes that made me laugh. So at one point, Donnie and Jerboa, they go to the cinema together on a date. The film they're going to see is called It Came From Uranus. Now, the title of the film is not funny, but the scene that we see from that movie is. So there's like a werewolf who's undergoing a transformation. He's got globules appearing on his face, and he's clearly in a lot of pain as he does this transformation. A nurse comes into the room and is horrified by what she's watching, but she doesn't run away. She just stands there like saying stuff and screaming. This transformation is the longest transformation I've ever seen in my life, and yet this nurse just doesn't run. She just stands there, and the fact that she doesn't run and she ends up dying, I found to be absolutely hilarious. The other funny scene, and this is kind of the same joke but repeated in a different way. So we get a moment where there's like a ballerina werewolf who has a transformation mid-performance, and her male co-star notices that she's changing, and he's got this horrified look on his face, but he doesn't run. He just carries on doing his routine and jumps and things. And again, the fact that he doesn't just get the hell out of there, I just found really hilarious. But those two moments aside, the rest of this film just has absolutely nothing to offer. It's really bad, and past a point it seems to know that it's got no horror, no comedy, so it starts to drift into the drama genre somehow. So you get all these characters in the outback who banded together like scientists and werewolves, and as an audience we're asked to kind of feel sorry for them, that they've had to create this nomadic life for themselves. We get all this sad music, and we see these characters throwing looks of respect to each other like they've survived years now, and isn't it cool that they've got these bonds between them. And I just couldn't get into it. You know, Jerboa and Donnie, they have a son who grows up because a few years pass in the space of one scene in the movie, but I just couldn't find myself feeling anything for any of these characters because they haven't been properly set up in the first half of the movie, when maybe that part of the movie was something else entirely. You know, I just wanted the soldiers to catch up with these people and shoot them all dead so that we don't have to have this same continuity for the Howling 4. I'm sorry, that's just the way I felt about these people. We also get this subplot where apparently the werewolves all come from ancestors in Russia. Apparently werewolves started in Russia, but because of the Cold War they all started leaving and setting up packs in other parts of the world, obviously including Australia. But it just seems like a load of faff for the type of film that this is. I just couldn't get into processing this information given the fact that I wasn't enjoying the main thrust of the movie. It didn't help when I was watching this that it's not on the greatest format either. So I watched this on Amazon Prime. It's got like a compressed box sort of look. They haven't been able to get a good ratio for this. It did not look good on my massive TV. We get some scenes where we're seeing the world from the werewolves' point of view, and you get this weird kind of panoramic effect, which makes it feel like the werewolves are actually some kind of cyclops. It's not good, but sometimes you watch an average film or a bad film, but if it's in a really good presentation, widescreen, you know, it's got a really touched up kind of 4K, Blue K, whatever, that can make the experience a little bit better. But this film did not have that going for it. Quite the opposite, actually. You know, from the first 5 minutes, I was thinking, oh, it's one of them, is it, that hasn't been, you know, properly remastered at any point during its life cycle. But I can understand why, because it's a pretty bad film. When I was reviewing Howling 2, I made a comparison to Prom Night 2 because of the fact that both sequels take a more comedic approach than their first film. When I was watching this, I was again reminded of Prom Night, this time Prom Night 3, but for different reasons, because Prom Night 3 was also a film that had a really bad ratio when I watched it. I had to watch it on my phone because even trying to put it on my TV, it was just blurry, and the only way I could make it crisp and clear to see was literally shrinking it down to a really small size. Now, Howling 3 is not quite that bad. I was able to watch it on my TV, but the thing about Prom Night 3 is that it's actually a pretty decent, funny film, and I'd love to see it remastered, but this one, it doesn't need remastering, it needs burning. It's just not very good at all. There's this really icky scene where Donnie and Jerboa have just had sex, but they are absolutely caked in sweat. I mean, they are dripping in it, and I don't think it's the fact that they're in Australia. I just think that Phillipe Mora has decided to take the most ultra-realistic approach to sex that he can think of, which is just drowning these actors in sweat or whatever he's put on them. Now, what they normally do in movies with sex scenes where we come to the party late, they just keep the actors sweat-free most of the time. You know, they keep the actors dry, and this just preserves the sexiness of the scene, you know. But what we see here with Donnie and Jerboa, I mean, they are literally just caked in it, and it just completely kills the vibe of the scene. I mean, I'm looking at this actress under the sheet, and I'm thinking, I am not attracted to you right now at all. And Phillipe Mora carries on this theme from the second movie as well, of werewolves being obsessed with sex in general. So Jerboa's filming a scene at one point in this movie she's in, but she just has to have sex. She can't just concentrate on her work, so she grabs Donnie and they go into the corridor and literally start humping with the other actors on the other side of the door, and it's like, come on, man. This isn't characterization, it's just boring. Later on, there's another icky scene where Jerboa gets pregnant and she starts to give birth on her own in a barn. We see the whole grisly thing, that the little tiny werewolf struggling to get out, and it does, and then it just gradually crawls into her little pouch thing. She's got hair all over at this point. She's like mid-transformation when she's giving birth. It goes on for a long time, this scene, but it's just kind of gross to watch. It's actually the second really nasty scene in a barn I've watched this week, because I watched High Plains Drifter a few days ago, and Clint Eastwood's character has to rape somebody in a barn in that film. So I'm not having a good week with barns, but this scene is just not very pleasant to watch at all. And it's roughly this point of the movie, actually, where the horror comedy is ditched and it becomes like a drama film for the rest of it. So once this kid is born, basically, it's full-blown drama with time jumps and all the rest of it that I was describing earlier. But yeah, I'm just not into this film. It's just, oh my God, it's so bad. Normally at this point of the video, I would hold up the DVD or Blu-ray that I have for the film that I'm reviewing, but I do not own the Howling 3. As I said earlier, I watched this on Prime. Thank God I didn't waste any money on a physical copy of this film, because it's a bad one. But you know what? I've got one more positive, and that is the fact that I am able to put this video out there to hopefully prevent other people from going through what I went through with this. You know how in Alien there's like that distress beacon in the ship, and Sigourney Weaver and company, they all investigate the beacon, but they sort of ascertain later on that it was meant as a warning. Well, this video is my sort of distress beacon about Howling 3, and hopefully it will keep people away. Hopefully. Right, let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score we have for this movie. There's not much in this bag. 1 bloody axe out of 5. And the only reason I'm giving the film 1 is because of those 2 scenes, which did genuinely make me laugh. I think if it wasn't for that, I could have easily given this film half an axe, or maybe even nothing. But I would say this is easily one of the worst films I've ever reviewed on this channel. This is definitely in the top 5 worst films I've ever reviewed on this channel. It's utterly terrible. I was very bored, and I hope that Howling 4 takes a completely different path. I hope they get rid of Phillipe friggin' Mora, because I've had enough of him now. I don't think he's involved in number 4, just because I did look at his filmography a couple of weeks ago, and I'm sure I only saw Howling 2 and 3 on there. I didn't see number 4. So I have optimism that number 4 will be taking some kind of different approach, but we will see. But this was a waste of my time. I hope it wasn't a waste of yours. Until next time, cheerio, mate.